Year 3. Orhan sits in the camp beneath the walls of Bursa and stares at the city. He does not storm it. He does not retreat. He simply waits. His men ask, when? He does not answer, because the answer is 7 more years. Most people think the Ottoman Empire grew through force. That is not true. It grew through patience, and patience, in the end, is also what destroyed it. Imagine a tribe, not an army, not a state, a tribe. A few hundred horsemen on the dusty edge of Anatolia, unknown to anyone, and of no concern to anyone. In fewer than 300 years, their descendants stand on 3 continents, and the Pope is composing prayers for someone to stop them. The only state that ever conquered Constantinople, and ultimately destroyed itself in the process. How that happened and why. That is what we are talking about today. It all begins somewhere toward the end of the 13th century. Osman I, grandson of Suleiman Shah, receives control over a small Turkic tribe in the region we today call Turkey. Byzantium around him is rotting from within. Civil wars, economic collapse, the loss of provinces. And Osman does something simple but brilliant. He does not try to seize everything at once. He builds. He establishes governing bodies, sets up symbols of authority, preaches Islam as a unifying force. The small tribe transforms into something greater, into an idea. And here is where it gets interesting. Because what distinguished the early Ottomans from dozens of other tribes in the region was not strength, it was patience and institutional thinking. They were building a state while others were simply fighting. His son Orhan picks up the baton and does something that changes everything. He lays siege to the city of Bursa. Not a storm, a siege. 10 years. Imagine what that meant in practice. Inside the city, less food, growing fear. People are born and die under siege, never knowing any other life. And outside, Orhan waits. He does not attack, he does not retreat. He simply waits. 10 years is not a strategy in our sense. It is a different way of thinking about time and victory. And when Osman dies, Orhan is already sitting in the first true capital of his state. But he does not stop there. He reforms the army, adds infantry to the cavalry, and another 10 years later, the Ottomans have their first fleet. Small, modest, but a fleet. And that fleet gives them control over the Bosphorus and the Dardanelles. Take note, a tribe that began with horses in the dust now controls the maritime straits between Europe and Asia. In a single generation, Murad then continues. The Balkans open before the Ottomans, Serbia, Bulgaria, growing influence stretching ever further west. And here something happens that will repeat itself again and again throughout this story: internal betrayal. Murad's own son conspires against him. The plot is crushed, and the father orders his son's execution. But this is not mere cruelty. It is the logic of a state's survival, where weakness at the top means the collapse of everything. Under Murad, the Janissaries appear. And that is a story in itself. An elite born not on the battlefield, but in other people's homes. The system was part of a broader practice. Boys, mostly from Balkan villages, aged 10 to 12, were taken from their families and sent for training. Imagine such a boy from Serbia or Bulgaria. He will never see his parents again. He is given a new name, a new language, a new faith. 20 years later, he will become one of the finest soldiers of his age. And the only things he will have in this life are his sword and the honor of the corps. No land, no family, no alternative. That is precisely why the Janissaries were so lethal. They had literally nothing to lose but their reputation. Armed at first with hammers and axes, later with muskets and cannons. The Janissaries will endure for 5 centuries, and as we shall see, their end will be just as dramatic as their beginning. But the true turning point is Mehmed II. He looks at Constantinople and sees not merely a city, he sees a symbol. As long as Constantinople stands, Byzantium exists, even as a shadow of itself. As long as it stands, there is a psychological threshold no one has crossed. And Mehmed decides to cross it. The preparations took years. With 2 new fortresses, he cuts off movement through the straits, effectively encircling the city before the siege even begins. Then, an army of 100,000. Then, cannons. Giant cannons, cast specifically for this campaign, the likes of which Europe had never seen. 53 days of continuous bombardment. And inside the city, the last emperor, Constantine V, knows the end is near. According to accounts, on the night before the final assault, he came to Hagia Sophia, not as an emperor, but as an ordinary man. He asked forgiveness of all he might have wronged. He removed his purple mantle. And at dawn, he went to the wall in plain armor, like a common soldier. He had every opportunity to flee. Genoese ships stood in the harbor. But he stayed, and he died in battle, and to this day no one knows exactly where his grave is. 1,500 years of Byzantium vanished in a single May morning in 1453. Constantinople became Istanbul. And if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe, because it only gets bigger from here. After the fall of Constantinople, the activity of the Ottoman fleet multiplies many times over. Mehmed presses into Albania, Bosnia, reaches toward the Black Sea. The Crimean Khanate becomes a vassal. The man who began as just another ruler of a small state now controls a space stretching from the Danube to the Euphrates, all within a single reign. But the greatest ruler is still to come. Suleiman the Magnificent comes to power in the early 16th century, and his era becomes the point beyond which it is no longer possible to rise higher. 15.5 million subjects across 3 continents. The first military academy in Constantinople. Cannon production multiplies. The Shehzade Mosque is built, one of the most beautiful architectural achievements of the age. Hungary is crushed, its king Louis II dying in battle. Austria is forced to pay tribute in gold, and now pay attention to how Suleiman wrote to Charles V, the most powerful monarch in Europe, Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. In his letter he lists his titles: Sultan of Sultans, Khan of Khans, ruler over rulers. And only afterward, almost in passing, addresses Charles. Not as an equal, as the ruler of a province that Suleiman happens to know about. The Habsburgs sign peace on Istanbul's terms. In the east, Persia retreats. Baghdad passes under Suleiman's control. Consider the scale. This is not a regional state. This is the greatest power of its time, simultaneously waging victorious wars in Hungary, Austria, Persia, and North Africa. And all the while, developing culture, reforming law, building cities. But here is the thing about peaks. From them, there is only one direction. Selim II, Suleiman's son, concentrates on domestic policy. He reforms law, improves conditions of military service, establishes standards of justice. But on land, the empire has already begun to lose the initiative. The Tsardom of Muscovy and Austria are gathering strength, and almost imperceptibly, the balance shifts. Then, a full century of revolts, palace coups, and wars with mixed results. The long Turkish War against the Habsburgs, which brought victory to neither side. The Ottoman-Persian War, which ended in an ambush and the loss of 50,000 soldiers in a single day. Wars that exhaust but resolve nothing. And here the central question of this story arises. Why? Why did a state that grew from a tribe to a world empire in 250 years fail to adapt? The answer: the Janissaries. The same force that made the Ottoman Empire great became its break. The Janissaries, who were once an obedient instrument of power, gradually transformed into a caste of influence with interests of their own. Every attempt to reform the army met their resistance. Every sultan who tried to change something risked being deposed, literally. And this logic repeated itself generation after generation. Reform, revolt, retreat. Reform, revolt, retreat. The end of the Janissaries came at the hands of Sultan Mahmud II, already in the 19th century, harshly, decisively, without compromise. He dissolved the core, rebuilt a new army, reformed the banking system, and launched industrialization. But time had been lost. Russia pressed from the north. Austria from the west, the Crimean War drained the finances, 45,000 dead and a growing foreign debt. The war was won, but the price paid was one from which they never recovered. The next Russo-Turkish War in the late 1870s took even more. Montenegro, Serbia, Bulgaria, Romania, independence. The British Empire, which had just fought alongside them, occupies Cyprus, then Egypt. Allies are always the first to disappear when weakness is in the air. In the 20th century, the internal movement of the Young Turks removes the Sultan from real power. Then the First World War. The Ottoman Empire chooses the side of Germany and loses alongside it. Of the state that once stretched across 3 continents, a piece of Anatolia remains. But even here, it is not the end. Because the last thing the Ottoman tradition produced was Ataturk. Turkish nationalists refused to recognize the peace treaty and, through military advance, forced the Greeks to retreat. In October 1923, the Turkish Republic is proclaimed, a new state on the ruins of the old, one that exists to this day. This is the paradox of this story. The Ottoman Empire did not simply fall, it transformed. That tribe from Anatolia, which no one took seriously, did not ultimately disappear. It changed its form. By the way, write in the comments which moment in the history of the Ottoman Empire surprised you most. I'm genuinely curious. 6.5 centuries. From a few hundred horsemen in the dust to a state that changed the map of the world. And if you thought you knew this story before, now you know it differently.